So what is the question that we ask? When patients clear MARCoNS from their nose, does their MSH come back up? And does the same thing happen with two other markers we measured at the same time that are also relevant in this context? But the basic question here is really more like what happens to this hormone when you treat and clear this microbial bacteria in the sinuses? That's really the question here that's at heart. And this was done by looking at 188 patients that are coming from PEC's clinic. So this is data coming from a real life clinic and patients that have been part of this. So we looked at those 188 adult patients who came from this clinic. Each person had blood work done at 2 different times, meaning we had a baseline assessment where we looked at MSH, MMP9, and VIP blood levels. And we did that at a baseline. Then we had a follow-up where PEC remeasured those blood works. And what happened in between was mainly a treatment of MARCoNS. It could have been minimum of 6 weeks. It could have been longer for some people. It could have been a couple months. It varied across patients. But the core thing in between those 2 time points was an intervention catered around MARCoNS. All of these patients at the initial time point at the beginning were testing positive for MARCoNS. And so we wanted to do a natural split of like, what happens for people who naturally clear the MARCoNS based on the test results? What happens to these biomarkers? What happens to the MSH? What happens to the MMP9? What happens to VIP levels, right? That's what we're looking at in between those 2 time points. And so we're comparing people who cleared MARCoNS to people who did not clear MARCoNS. So here's what we found. I'm going to just reference it narratively in text, but there's 2 things that stood out in this paper. So number 1, CIRS treatment held broadly, meaning when we compare MSH, MMP9, and VIP at time point 1 at baseline and at follow-up, we see these amazing improvements in all 3 markers in this group of 188 patients. So we saw MSH went from less than 8 to like 20 on average. We saw, and this is the big one, MMP9 was almost at 800 at baseline for these patients. And then it dropped to 350 on average. That's a massive drop. And then VIP went from low 20s to, I think, high 30s, 40s. On average, again, these are trends in this data. And so these are all showing that these patients were being treated with different things, including the MARCoNS treatment. What that's suggesting, and we were able to quantify these trends, is that these shifts are real, they matter. It means that the CIRS treatment protocol is doing something measurable, important at a broader level. People are getting better. And showing that in a quantified statistical sense with 200 people with these markers is very important because it's validating CIRS treatment. The overall idea of treatment that's informed by CIRS is saying, well, we see these movements that clinically would imply that they're getting better or that they're normalizing their markers. So that's independent of the MARCoNS story. This is just general broad shifts that we were able to quantify around these 3 markers, which is really cool. And then, of course, the start of the show was that clearing MARCoNS was associated with higher recovery of MSH levels. So patients who clear MARCoNS had a noticeably bigger MSH bounce back. You would see a higher recovery for those patients at the second time point compared to the patients who were still testing positive for MARCoNS. The cool thing about this is that this pattern was only for MSH. We could not see this show up for MMP9 or VIP, meaning it didn't matter if you had MARCoNS or not, MMP9 or VIP moved in the same way. It didn't matter if you were part of one group or the other. It did matter for MSH. Because we were able to pinpoint it to MSH specifically and not the other markers, it suggests that something genuine is happening that needs to be further exploited. So now we've set the stage for future research, for future scientists and doctors to really invest in this idea. We tested this finding in several different ways, including controlling for other variables, confounding variables like age, biological sex. We removed patients that were doing VIP treatment. Some patients in this cohort were doing VIP nasal spray, and that could have been a confound. We removed them. We tried to account for a bunch of things, and the pattern held up every time. There's still more to understand, which is exactly why more research needs to follow. And that's exciting because it opens up all these very fascinating questions.